The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. Now, James Boggs has the Detroit story. He was born into a sharecropping family in Junction, Alabama, and he moved to the city and worked in the auto industry for over 20 years. And Grace was born in Rhode Island and lived in New York and was a Chinese-American philosopher. Both James and Grace Lee Boggs would go on to lead a movement of self-resiliency and working together as a community. They were instrumental in the civil rights movement through the 60s and 70s and further into the eras with the Black Panther Party. James and Grace Lee remained married for 40 years until James's death in 1993. And Grace Lee Boggs continued the legacy and carried the work until her death in 2015 at the age of 100. Grace was an author, a feminist, a philosopher, and social activist who inspired and changed many minds in the city of Detroit and made sure Detroit thrived with love and community. This month, the James and Grace Lee Boggs Foundation are celebrating celebrating her life with a 10-year memorial of her death. The gathering will honor the life and legacy of the civil rights activist and take a look at how to move forward in this moment in time that we're in right now. The event will take place this week at East Side Community Network alongside a live stream. And the MC of the evening will be NPR's It's Been a Minute host, Brittany Luce, who is also a Detroit native. Joining me in studio now are two guests close to Grace Lee Boggs in life. We have Donald Boggs, former president of the Metropolitan AFL-CIO, and the son of James Boggs, and the advisor for the Boggs Foundation. Hello, Donald. Welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we also have Alice Jennings here, who is a community activist and a longtime friend of Grace Lee Boggs. Alice, welcome to the Metro.
And welcome.
Yes. So jumping into things, Donald, it's the 10-year memorial tribute to Grace Lee Boggs, a pioneering civil and social activist that called Detroit home. And the theme of this commemoration is Reimagine Everything. So let's talk a little bit about that theme and where we are today.
Well, Grace and my dad worked most of their lives saying that we needed to change humanity to make a more humane human, if you would. And that they knew that in the process, they probably needed to do it out of what they thought to be the next American Revolution. So that's what we're going to try to do, is help build the next generation of folks who think in that same venue, that it's time to change America for the positive for all of the people.
For all of the people. And Alice, bringing you into the conversation, you were a longtime friend with Grace Lee Boggs. What are some of your favorite memories of Grace? What type of person was she, especially when we think about her as this activist and this woman who had such strong words to say about what was going on in the world? Who was she?
Well, Grace Lee Boggs was my friend, as was Jimmy Boggs.
Yeah.
I've fond memories of both of them, very much like family. Yeah. And Grace Lee Boggs, she was a brilliant person that when you stood next to her, you could hear the gadgets in her brain clicking. It was that kind of thinking that she did. Always thinking about the next steps, or maybe 3 or 4 steps ahead of what needed to be done for the community. And Jimmy and Grace both were community activists in Detroit, but their theories and their works and their books and their art all is international. Jimmy's books were translated into 5 or 6 different languages. Negroes Workers Notebook was translated way, way back in the 60s. And so when we think of Grace, we think of Jimmy, but we also think of Grace after Jimmy's death. And that after Jimmy passed away, Grace was thinking that we're always resisting, we're always fighting against something. Where is the reimagining and creation of moving forward with positivity? And with that, we came up with some very different programs that were aimed more toward doing positive things in the community that would really get people going in movement building.
Because Alice, I want to stay there with you for a moment, and Donna, we're going to bring you into the conversation as well. I just want to piggyback on that because it's so interesting. We often think about revolutionaries and the fighting of it or the action of it, but we never think about what happens after that. Is that moment of time or the revolution that's happening at that moment. So when we talk about reimagining a future, in what way was Grace trying to build on what she had already started with James years and years ago? Donald, we're going to start with you first.
Well, you ought to know that James and Grace were adamant about you'll cause a movement when you can bring people along with you, more the merrier, so to speak. And Dad used to always say, each of us by ourselves are nobody. Mm-hmm. It is only when we mix with other somebodies that we become something. And they were emphasis on we must bring them in as many organizations. And at one time, they probably belonged to 100, 120 different organizations because they understood. And Dad's came about as a byproduct of having worked at Chrysler during the time where Detroit was very anti-Black. Yeah. And he worked on a group that actually went and organized the workers to go and make all the restaurants in the area of Chrysler let Black folks come to that restaurant. And they did that by telling them that, because the restaurant said, well, we'll lose our white clients. They said, we'll give you enough Black clients that you won't need them. But what he did afterwards was more important. He merged with the NAACP and other organizations to go and break all restaurants in downtown Detroit to serve Black folks. He realized the need to bring others along with you if you really wanted to make change. And he and Grace were adamant about that you grow the movement by growing people.
I love that. Alice, yes. Same thing. Just continuing on the thought that you had about just having this moment in time where, yes, you're a revolutionary right now doing these things that are action-based, yet what happens when we reimagine that and do it in a different lens? So, yes. Just piggy on that.
Well, when you talk about revolution, you talk about change. And Grace and Jimmy thought about revolution in the sense of making change and love. Not violence, not with guns. The revolution is made with people caring about each other, their neighbors, their people they work with, to try to understand that we are in this thing together, more or less. We are all here, and we are here to try to love in a lot of ways, love our brothers and sisters in a way that makes for a better world. So when we talk about revolutionary humanism, which was the concept that Grace was working on at the very end of her life, we were talking about having the same fervor, the same get up and go, going into a revolutionary movement with love instead of bullets. And so this is the stretching of our humanity. One of the things that if we cannot care about each other, how can we care about ourselves?
That's something I stand on. So, I really do stand on that idea or statement when you can, if you don't care for yourself, you're not going to care much for others. So you got to start within. But we're talking about a 10-year memorial tribute for Grace Lee Boggs happening October 18th at Eastside Community Network. Our guest is Donald Boggs, son of activist James Boggs, and Alice Jennings, who is also a civil rights activist and longtime friends of Grace Lee Boggs. And I want to start this, reset after with a quote here from Grace Lee Boggs. It says, normally it would take decades for people to transform themselves from this hyper-individualistic, hyper-materialistic, damaged human beings that Americans in all walks of life are today to the loving, caring people we need in the deepening crises. But these are not normal times. If we don't speed this transformation, the likelihood is that, armed with AK-47s, we will soon be at each other's throats. That is why linking love and revolution is an idea whose time has come. Grace Lee Boggs. You just started to talk about that a little bit as well, Alice. But I do, Donald, want to bring you in listening to those words. I fear that we've seen these times. We're here. We see that at our door. when we think about the teachings of your father, James, and Grace Lee as well, what would they say about this moment in time?
They'd be both highly frightened, but also highly engaged.
Yeah.
They'd be looking for a solution. Grace saw it very well when Obama became president. She saw the white hatred, the white fear that blacks are going to take over and my other minorities. And she said that I believe this is the greatest threat to democracy and more similar to fascist Germany than any time in the history of America. So it's no question we're in frightening times, but they would have taken action. They would have said, how do we sit down and gather people and come up with a solution, come up with some action that we should be taking? And that's one of my concerns today. My labor movement friends out there be a little angry with me. I don't see the labor movement. I don't see the NAACP. I don't see people saying it's time for a march on Washington. I don't mean one march on Washington. I mean a march on Washington every week or every month. It's time that we get active because the fascists and the right-wingers are heading in a way that is not going to be good for democracy.
And Alice, just piggybacking off of that and listening to the quote we just heard from Grace Lee Boggs, what would you say right now in your opinion and from their teachings and learnings, the moment that we're in right now?
Well, we're in this moment, but in a way we've been here before, after slavery and after the Constitution was amended. As a civil rights attorney myself, I know that we are losing our rights at a phenomenal speed. And one of the things we have to do is to educate ourselves and our communities about what our rights are in this moment in time. What time is it on the clock of the world? I believe Jimmy and Grace would say it's time for us to come together to talk and to put together community solutions to problems. When the food stamps and the Medicaid and Medicare and all of the social programs that have basically allowed for there to be a continuation in our society of everybody living together. When all that's gone, we have got to learn that we must come together to work to solve our own problems and our own issues. There will not be an artillery coming over the mountaintop to save us. And we will, I'm sure Jimmy and Grace would be meeting right now saying, what are we going to do?
And just hearing you say that, I'm just thinking about just the generation of young folks right now. We often joke like, oh, we're the new aunties, so we have the uncles, so we got to figure out how to do this and do that. And we always joke about that. But do you see the baton being passed from generation to generation, especially when it comes to grassroots organizing? Excuse me, because Donald, you just said, we got to get out there. People have to start doing those marches, not just once, but weekly if they can, or even whatever they can do it, however they can do it. So Donald, is the baton being passed generation to generation right now?
Well, I was hoping that had happened when we had the Black Lives Matter gig organized. As I see it from where I sit, I don't know if we're passing the baton because I don't know if the younger generation is ready to accept that. Sometimes when I even talk to members of my family, there are people who believe that, this too shall pass. Yeah. I don't think that's the truth. I don't think this is going to pass. I think we're going to have to make changes that will impact what our government is doing to us. So I don't know if the younger generation is ready to take on that responsibility. Activism is something that's tough. I remember when H. Rap Brown was down on Dexter Avenue back in the 60s, and he made a presentation. He said, some of you got processed hair and also processed minds. And, we got to get younger folks to realize this is a treacherous times we live in. And it's not, one of the comedians was on the radio the other day, and he said, I didn't even start voting till I was 35. And it's amazing the young number of young folks who don't recognize that voting is one of the most crucial things that gives us some authority to control our destiny. So again, I'm hoping we're passing the baton. I'm just also hoping that they're ready to receive it and act upon it in the appropriate manner.
Alice, I do want to ask you that same question because is it being passed down? I'll talk about myself and even my nieces and nephews who are younger, also voting age, have not voted. So it's very interesting to see the time that we're in right now and who's supposed to be the ones on the front line?
Well, I would just say this, that voting is so key. I was friends with Mrs. Rosa Parks as well. Her issue was that if we don't vote, we're going to lose our rights. And this is so, I believe Grace and Jimmy would support that also. But even beyond that, Jimmy and Grace were intergenerational leaders. So if we had a gathering of people around whatever the issue was of the day, whether it was environmental justice or it was poverty or it was food justice or water justice, they would be there with younger people. And I remember when Jimmy passed on, we had a meeting called What Fire Can a New Generation Catch? From the thoughts and thinking of Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs. And there were young people there. So part of it, and I agree, I have 6 kids and probably 23 grandkids. And so I know that they think differently, but they've never known any depression in the way that even I knew depression or my mother and father knew depression. So part of it is it hasn't happened to them yet. But as we come into this new period, this new curve that's happening, this big wide turn that is about to be made in this country, particularly around who gets what, where, when, and how, I think it's going to be even more critical that we bring the young people in. I mean, they can be 5 years old and be sitting in a community meeting. My daddy was a Teamster, and when there was a march down Woodward Avenue when Martin Luther King was here, I believe it was in 1963.
It was.
I was marching with my daddy. And I know I wasn't 5, I was probably 11 at the time. But it was important to me. And it's one of the things out of my childhood that I remember. And so we do have to bring the children in and the young adults and the teenagers, middle age. We that intergenerational issue that Jimmy and Grace were all about. Coming together with food. Don't forget the food, because you got to have some food there.
Exactly.
And to communicate with each other and commune.
Yes. And hearing both of you kind of nod when Martin Luther King Jr., the march on Woodward 1963, my aunts were there as well, and they talk about that and being in that space and that place.
And Grace was actively involved with that. Grace was
organizing.
That's just so much history right here in the city of Detroit. So just a follow-up question here. What is the Boggs Foundation doing to bring young folks into activism? Donald, have you seen any successful strategies show up that help inspire young people to do things as simple as vote?
Well, Alice would be better answering that than me. I would say that we unequivocally have reached out to them, no question. We engaged them and involved them, yes. But Alice would be more specific.
Yes, just being on the ground, seeing how the young people, and then like you said, you have 20 plus grandkids, 6 kids, so you understand that intergenerational gap that you have to bridge.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we're doing is we're bringing them into the knowledge about Jimmy and Grace. And recently as this Saturday, we were over at the Field Street Block Club annual Harvest Fest, where there were lots and lots of children and young people and senior citizens as well. So one of the ways of engagement is to be there, to be in the place, to know, to talk, and to think about with others, where do we go from here? We don't have all the ideas. The Boggs Foundation doesn't. The foundation has sent probably 300 or 400 boxes of items to the Walter Luther Library right here on campus, Wayne State campus. So that, and we're working to digitize that material to make that available not only to college students who could come and review the material, but to make it internationally available so young people in elementary school or high school could study what Jimmy and Grace were all about. And we're also working to build a museum where Jimmy and Grace lived for 50 years plus. And that's over on Field Street, where the first floor is where they lived, and they held what they called Boggs Street University. They didn't call it that. Other people named it that because they came and they learned so much in the space that became known as the Boggs University. We are continuing to have events and meetings and training in a way that would support young people. And one of the things that we have on the program book is to create a new Detroit summer. And this would bring people in from, young people in from all over the country, like it was when we first created it just before Jimmy died in 1992-93. Detroit Summer was a learning program, a eating program, a get to know each other program, and we got students or young people from all over the country, the world, in fact. There were people from other countries. And to study the kind of thinking, not that what Jimmy and Grace had to say is what we can just take and stamp and apply today. Each generation will have to come up with their own solutions to these problems, but to put them in a space and to say, this is what their thinking was at that time and what could you think about now? Let's see what you're thinking about.
Go ahead, Donald.
And why we use the Field Street, why it was so important, because there's Field and Goethe right on the corner. It's where Dad and Grace's home was. And he before he died in 93, the year before, I believe, before he had to take oxygen, he made a presentation at University of Michigan, and Grace was sitting to his side, as she often did. And he said to the students, I'm a factory worker, but I know more than about factories. In fact, I could be the president of the United States. Mm-hmm. And they all looked at him and gasped. And he said, you see, you got to think that way. You got to think that you can do that which has not yet been done.
That's right.
And that is where we'll end our conversation. Donald Boggs is the son of James Boggs, and we have Alice Jennings here, who is a community activist, also a civil rights lawyer, attorney, and a longtime friend of Grace Lee Boggs. Reimagine Everything, the 10-year memorial for Grace Lee Boggs, is this Saturday at Eastside Community Network. It's hosted by Detroit native and NPR host Brittany Luce, and will include guest speakers, including State Senator Stephanie Chang. There will also be a live stream accompanying the event. I want to say thank you both, Alice and Donald, for joining us on the show and talking more about the life and times of James and Grace Lee Boggs.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Coming up today on Indigenous Peoples Day, for the first time in 30 years, the city of Detroit is hosting a powwow at Hart Plaza. We'll check in with a festival coordinator right after this.